So don't stand on the sideline when wrongdoing is occurring and just not call it out, because you'll get all sorts of flack for that.
Yeah, all it takes for evil to succeed is a few good people to do nothing.
Yeah.
We made it, man. I'm going to shout to 3, and can I just get everyone shout the word freedom? It's just going to get the vibration higher in here, yeah? Yeah? Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Freedom! Bang. All right, cool. King, thank you for being here today.
It's nice to see you. Thank you.
I first came across your video on the Constitution about freedom in 2020, I believe it was. You were standing there in a suit, and it blew me away. It was one of the first times I recognized someone was actually trying to empower us with true education. So today is June the 15th. We're in Runnymede, where it was sealed in 1215. Yep. And the king has arrived, and he's on the seats, and we're just going to talk, man. Can I get a round of applause, please? So yeah, man, I've got some questions to ask, but I'd really like to just kind of leave you to open up the space and share what's on your heart right now. And it's got to be valuable for us, man. We're actually trying to find remedies out of this. So please, King, could you introduce yourself?
Okay. Thank you very much. It's great to see everybody on this beautiful day in Runnymede. Yeah, my name is William Keyte, and I'm a constitutional law researcher. That's normally a bit of a killer of conversations. Normally people kind of walk off in the opposite direction at that point. But it actually should be the subject that we're all really passionate about, because that's the thing. Understanding that constitutional law is the thing that gives us our liberties. It's the thing that keeps government out of the way doing its thing that it should be doing, which is effectively be nothing more than supporting our living. Allowing us effectively to live a kind of an anarchist lifestyle, which is basically conducting ourselves, being self-masters, being responsible for ourselves, and then all the sort of the government type stuff stays out of the way. And it's the constitutional law that places the limitations on government so that they are actually contained and behaving themselves. So that's the point. That was what it was all about for me. And central to the constitutional law, of course, is the thing that this is all about here, this place at Runnymede, which was the signing of the 1215 Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And that's still relevant today. And the establishment is very good at sort of gaslighting us and confusing us a little bit about this. So on the one hand, they'll say, yes, it's amazing. You've got signs up everywhere talking about Magna Carta and how important it is, and it's the basis of our rule of law. And then on the other hand, they'll say, no, that's not really very important anymore. We actually produce laws, and we've repealed a lot of that, which is not true. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on, so quite deliberate confusion. So maybe what I should do is just clarify a few things there. Please. Before I do, actually, just we'll go into questions and things that you might have specifically, but the most important thing, and my friend Suk here can back me up on this, it's about the logic, really. Because you don't have liberty and you don't have freedom unless the people themselves are giving themselves their own liberties, are defining the edges of what is morally acceptable within your community. Yeah, the things that you would rightly get punished for. Yeah, so who should be judging that? Yeah, it's the people themselves that should be judging that, because that's the only way that you can have an equitable society. You can't do it any other way. Anything else you want to add on that, sir? On the logic behind simply the fact that if you don't have that in place, you've got a problem.
No, absolutely. If you don't have that in place, you've got a problem. And how is that put in place is ultimately Magna Carta dictates that you have to have an independent judiciary. Okay, and an independent judiciary is where the people pass all the judgments on the laws that they have. The government can't write in and approve their own legislation. Okay, the government is the legislature and they write legislation, but it's the people in an independent judiciary with independent courts that keep the system honest. There's a reason we don't get to audit our own business financial accounts. Right? For the same reason, the government shouldn't be able to audit their own legislation. It's simple logic. That logic is timeless. It doesn't matter whether it was 1215, 849, or during Christ's time. The logic doesn't change.
Yeah,
that's quite straightforward. So a lot of the time you hear a lot of distraction and a lot of this element of a technical detail isn't right or that isn't. It's negligible. The point here is understanding the principles of basic logic in terms of natural law. And that is, if the people are sovereign, then they have to be able to determine their own way. And you can't do that if the only courts you go into where the judges are paid by the very people who are writing the legislation. That is the definition of corruption and fraud. And anyone that doesn't agree in the cabinet or anywhere else, we challenge you to that.
Wow.
A death oath to that challenge, actually. So if you fail to prove the logic is wrong, then we hang you.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the simple logic of it, that it's the people that are the supreme judiciary and the supreme legislature, essentially. That's what we're saying. So the way it's supposed to work, just lay that out really quickly. Shall I do that?
Please.
Yeah. So the fundamental mechanism of our Constitution, the central pillar of our constitutional law, is the supremacy of the jury. Okay, so on that case, on that one occasion, that set of 12 randomly picked people from the community are the highest law council of the land. And they're judging two things. Yes, they're judging on the accused man before them in court, but they're also, and this is key, because this is what the bit they don't want you to know about, is the fact that they're also judging on the appropriateness of the legislation and the lawfulness of the legislation that brought that man into court as well. Yeah? So they're judging on those two things together. It's kind of like a balancing act. Yeah? They have the power to do that. They have the power and the right to do that. But they're not being told that at the moment. Yeah? So your typical jury is not being told of their power and right to judge on legislation. And that's a problem, because that's the mechanism that makes your governing system democratic. It's nothing to do with voting in elections, which is adult suffrage. The democracy comes from the fact that you have a mechanism where your people are raised to that level, elevated. Somebody's excited over there. Fantastic. There you go. Good. So how does it work? So a man comes before court, and if the jury feels, for a number of reasons, because they're exercising their conscience. Remember, it's all about judging right and wrong behaviour, and that is an act of conscience. What they're looking for is mens rea. They're looking for, has this individual that's come before us, have they committed mens rea, which is basically, is there malice? Is there some kind of malicious intent in what they've done? Yeah, and this is the whole point, is that any justice that's judged by the people through that human conscience is like a custom solution for justice. As opposed to legislation, which is the way that it works at the moment, is that you actually get punished by the legislation itself automatically. Okay, now you can have legislation under our properly functioning constitution, but it's not supposed to have the power to punish by itself. All it's there to do is to bring you before the court of those people for them to make that human judgment. Yeah, so it's always a human judgment according to moral conscience. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's a custom solution, as opposed to the legislation, the way it's operating now, which is a sort of off-the-peg solution. Yeah, it's like modelling human behaviour ahead of the time. Yeah, trying to chop it up and make it algorithmic and program it, which is like what they do with everything. You know, they're always trying to do that. Yeah, but that's the problem with it. Yeah, it must be based on human conscience. And that's what our Constitution promises us. It's what the Magna Carta has got built into it in the Articles of Common Law. Okay, so our constitutional law is actually based on the bedrock of common law. And those are it's not the whole Magna Carta, but it's aspects within it that express the fundamental principles of our constitutional law that already existed prior to Magna Carta, was already in place before then. So Magna Carta wasn't the start of our constitutional law, it's the most recent declaration of those principles. That's basically what Magna Carta was. A lot of people say, for example, that King John, who'd been acting criminally at the time, he'd been acting criminally because he'd already taken a coronation oath under the constitutional principles. So a lot of people say, well, 1215 Magna Carta is not valid because he was under duress. He absolutely was under duress, and rightly so, because he had broken effectively that promise. So for him to continue to be a legitimate king, he had to sign the principles of the 1215 Magna Carta, which was simply a restatement of what was already in place. Make sense? Yeah? Yeah. That's really all it is. Yeah, and Magna Carta is important because it is that expression, the most recent expression of our our Constitution. Hit me with a question, because I'm sure you've got a few there that you want to fire at me.
And then also, if anyone has any questions, please ask me, and then I'll ask it again on mic. I know there'll be a few people with some really deep questions.
In there before we go into the
Please.
questions.
Yeah, so go for it.
The rights that we're talking about, we refer to as inalienable rights or divine rights or creator rights. Those rights have not been given to us by any man. Those rights are presumed to be there by the fact that we have been born and we are manifest here. So because nobody gave those, nobody can take them away. So these are ancient rights, and it's those rights that the Constitution protects from a tyrannical authority.
Yes.
It's a very specific dynamic. So, for example, where the Coronavirus Act was brought in and a pastor or a reverend is being forced to close their church, they would be able to hold a court independent of government infrastructure. So they're not dependent on whether the government have locked down the country or not. They're not dependent on whether the judges are on duty. Okay, if the government locked down the whole country and all the courts are shut and all the judges are instructed to stay at home, the people can hold court independently. Wow. Right, so the reverend can hold court independently with 12 of his peers, in this instance business people or other leaders of places of worship, and they can challenge the fact that no government can stop you from entering a particular place if you love that more than you fear a virus, for example. It's about freedom of choice. So if you're worried about the virus, you can stay at home. If you love the Lord more than you fear the virus, then you will go to church. Okay, it's about freedom of choice. It's not about pushing one agenda or another agenda. Your sovereignty and your free will is what it protects.
Cool. Thank you. Wow.
Nice.
Okay, you kind of answered the last question I had is, are we the people below the government?
No, we're at the top of it.
So we're at the top.
The Lord themselves.
Okay. Could you explain to people that are very new to this what a true democracy is and what we're currently living in and what we think is a democracy?
Yeah, so just to restate that, so as I mentioned earlier, the primary characteristic of a democracy is where you have a tribunal in place of the people that judges on matters of justice. So it's the people themselves that do that. Specifically, actually, you could say that the best way of putting it is that they are the final arbiter of law. And where does that go back to? It goes back to the early Athenian constitution. So this is before Socrates and Plato, to the time of Cleisthenes, who was an aristocrat, interestingly. And that was very much, it was all about exousia rights. And it was essentially about the authority of the people. Yeah, placing the people above its own government. Later things went downhill to some extent in Greece, but the principles of common law, which is what we're really talking about, were much wider than people realise. So many of the countries of Europe were all under common law, under a similar system. And the same things that are expressed in our 1215 Magna Carta were expressed hundreds of years before by others in Europe. So Emperor Conrad of Germany, for example, 200 years before Magna Carta, expressed almost the exact same thing as Article 39 of our 1215 Magna Carta, which is basically that you can't lose your freedom, you can't lose your property, except by the law of the land, legem terrae, that specifically means the common law and the custom, and by the judgment of your peers. Yeah, that's absolutely key. And that was 200 years before Magna Carta in Germany as well. Yeah, so many of the countries of Europe were also operating under that as well. So that was a democratic constitution. If you're talking about a democratic constitution, that's what you're defining. It's not really about voting in elections and majority voting, although that can be considered a characteristic. The primary characteristic is that tribunal. Natural law tribunal is the key.
Does Parliament still exist?
Does Parliament exist now?
Yeah, and governments, or have they been dissolved? Maybe Mandy or Angie or someone can. Where are you? There they are. Maybe you could word that better, right? Because haven't they been dissolved now?
Since 2001.
Since 2001. Are you aware of this?
You're talking about Article 61 and the actions of Article 61.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could go into Article 61 and what that was about. So there was one of the principles of common law, one of the articles of common law, I should say, is Article 61, which is what is described as the Lawful Rebellion article.
Restoration Amendment. Restoration Amendment.
Restoration Amendment. What, Ken's? You're talking about?
Restoration Amendment to restore the rule of law.
To restore the rule of law, yes. But Article 61 specifically is basically the Lawful Rebellion article. It's known as that. And it gives us the right, when it's invoked, to distrain and distress the unlawful government and to transfer our allegiance to the barons or the lords who then invoked that article. And the interesting thing is that did actually happen in 2001. Was it February, March 2001? I forget the date.
23rd of March.
23rd of March.
2001.
I should know that, shouldn't I, off the top of my head?
Big date.
Yeah, exactly. So that did actually happen. That's a real thing. It wasn't denied by the Queen's private secretary, Sir Robin Janvrin, I think it was at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't denied. It was reported in the press as well. So that whole thing did actually happen. It's a real thing. My feeling is that acting under Article 61 is something we should all be doing. It's not a technical thing so much, I tend to feel, but that's just my feeling. I feel it tends to be, or should be, based on principle, on general principle, which is effectively that you are calling out the wrongdoing, you're calling out the lie, and you are standing in defence of the truth. That's what Article 61 is essentially doing. Yeah, and our Constitution.
Yep.
And the reason why I say that, and it has to be principle-based, is because the Constitution is not a contract between us, between the people, and the king, or as sometimes it's portrayed as that. It's not actually binding or compelling the people to do anything. What it's really there for is to limit government. Okay, so therefore what it's not stating is what the people themselves should or shouldn't be doing, more than what is already expected of them under universal natural law, which is to stand with truth. Wow. So that's effectively what Article 61 is calling us to do. Do you want to add, anyone want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so really in Fisher-Price terms, what does it say? It says if you recognise that the government has become tyrannical, you have a duty to oppose it.
Absolutely.
To call it out and to oppose it and to peacefully and lawfully restrain it and obstruct it at every single possible juncture. So stop paying your taxes.
Wow, perfect.
Right? Tax rebellion. And actually, you're not the rebels in this. The rebels are those who subverted the Constitution. So personally, I don't call it lawful rebellion. Call it the Restoration Amendment, because you're restoring the rule of law that has been subverted from the people. So maybe slight semantics.
No, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Okay.
perfect.
The other thing is, what you're actually pledging your allegiance to is the sovereign people. Okay,
Ourselves.
the barons or the rest of them are not the ones you're actually pledging your oath to in flesh and blood. What you're pledging your oath to is the principle that they stand for. And the principle that it stood for is that the people are sovereign, and until that gets put back in place, everyone has to basically obstruct the establishment.
And stand up, and we're doing this under Article 61, especially in our group, Magna Carta Article 61, and we've been doing it since 2020, and a lot of people have been opposing governments and local governments. We've had some losses, but we're getting success as well. Basically, all we want them to do is answer some very, very simple questions, which up to date they're not prepared to answer. Well, that's unlawful by itself under the public servants and all this. And basically, all the Queen is the head of state, which is she's just the head public servant. She's got a duty to the people under her coronation oath, and that's to serve and protect the people. And that's under the Constitution. And what Article 61 for me and our group and for Will and everyone else is, we just want to reserve our rights, preserve our rights, and get to the truth.
Yep.
Get to the truth. That's all we want. We want justice. We want simple questions answered. And if you want to join the Magna Carta group, we'll hand the cards out afterwards. We're on Telegram. We support Will, and we'll support any group that's standing up, because if you're not standing up right now, you're actually making tacit agreement, silent consent. So by not standing up, you are agreeing with everything that they are doing. That's how it works.
Yes, that's a fundamental thing in natural law. Just briefly, just to say that is that standing on the sidelines when wrongdoing
Yep.
is being done and not doing anything about it
Wow.
is that actually, and it's a measurable thing in the universe, by the way, that will bring you all kinds of things, nasty consequences. Yeah, the universe is not kind to anyone who does that. So that's a principle in natural law that you will discover, you will find it, you will see it. Yeah, you can witness that. Okay, so don't stand on the sideline when wrongdoing is occurring and just not call it out, because you'll get all sorts of flack for that.
Yeah, all it takes for evil to succeed is a few good people to do nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gunshots.
Angie, do you
Wow.
want to say something there?
It was just, I thought Mandy was going to talk about how it was invocated.
Well, but did Will basically covered that because obviously it was
Well, Tony Blair was the culprit that started all this. He signed a treaty called the Treaty of Nice, which basically was giving away all our privileges and
sovereign
rights and our sovereign rights.
It was the last
That's
straw.
that was the last straw. I mean, it goes back further anyway. When Ted Heath put us into what was called the common market, what we know today as the EU. But
The thing to remember, though, sorry, on that, is that the condition of lawfulness, even back decades before that, or even hundreds of years, was already unlawful anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why I say about Article 61 now, yes, it's a useful mechanism and we should use it and we pay heed to it. Yeah, but actually just calling the governing system out generally under the Constitution, that's kind of the same thing,
It is.
actually.
It is.
And keeping in mind all the time that the most important thing is the sovereignty of the people over their own government, which is not done by voting in elections, but how is it done? I'm testing you now. Trial by jury. Okay, and full jury independence, where the jury has the right to judge on the legislation, on the appropriateness of the legislation. Because without that, the people don't have the power. Yeah, forget voting. We know that doesn't work. Yeah, the whole point is that the Constitution provides this hidden mechanism that they don't like to talk about, right? So you only have your sovereignty if you're in charge of the legislation, and you only get that through a natural law tribunal where you are judging on justice, and your government simply is forced to carry out your judgments. Yeah, and that was all out of kilter way before Article 61. Okay, so that's important to remember that. The Treaty of Nice was like the last straw. Yeah, it was a technicality, and you know that's the important point. Somebody had a question. Do you want to?
She asked if you could repeat.
that one more time, because that was a juicy sentence.
A juicy sentence. What was the sentence?
You have to watch it back on the video.
yeah.
Wow, I don't know what it was I said, but
The whole thing about
trial by jury.
and just being in charge of your own
Sovereignty.
So yeah, so the people are the ultimate judges. They are the final arbiter of law. Yeah, they are the authority over their own government.
So how do we gain that charge of our own legislation?
Now, well, Article 61 will be a start, but it's got to be sheer numbers.
Yes.
Because the problem we have at the moment is the government is simply ignoring it. They're ignoring the limitations that are lawfully placed on them. Why? Because we, the people, have allowed them to do it over an incrementally long period of time, a massively long period of time. We're talking certainly decades, if not centuries. Things started to go wrong centuries ago. Okay, and that's how wildly off track things are. Okay, I don't think it would take that much to correct it, because the system is actually set up correctly to function.
Yeah.
We were chatting about that the other day.
Totally.
It's just the wrong people.
It's
I mean, it's probably key here. With a lot of people don't understand. The system is set up correctly. Okay, you've got lawful and you've got legal. Lawful pertains to any cases where a living man or woman, sentient being, is involved in it. So, the government has infringed on your rights, therefore the law is invoked. Legal is there for all the non-living entities. So, for example, corporations, government, institutions, charities, quangos like World Health Organization, NATO, United Nations. All of these different setups, all these different corporations have a separate set of rules to govern them, because they don't have the same rights as the living, which, when you sit back and think about it, makes total sense. The corruption has occurred where they are basically commoditizing the living sentient beings and processing them as though they are corporations. Okay, and that's what you have to realise. The reason they've removed the courts of law and have only left legal courts in place is because everyone is being processed as a commodity. You are not being processed as a conscience. Okay, and that's the important part to realise the difference between lawful and legal.
Freedom! Hi man, so we're back, we're in the sun. Just we're going to do some questions. A lot of people just want to be able to, you know, share some. Do you want to come forward, sister? And
yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'll just get this.
get that off you.
This gentleman did just answer it really, really well, because I think what a lot of people are looking for is approval by this system that you've done it right and you've won. And I was just saying, when you've done all of your paperwork, when you've declared yourself a sovereign being in everywhere that you need to declare that, and still you're going to court and still they're not acknowledging you, they're not turning over their papers, they are absolutely ignoring you.
Lawful.
And even when you I've had judges run out of court many a time, but what I was looking for was the stamp of approval to say, yeah, you won, you did it right. And I think that's what I was asking for. What do you do at that point when you've done everything you do? You say, like, well, now you need to actually own up to it. But my friend here said, they are unlawful people. Why are you looking for judgment and acceptance from them? So it's about the internal approval, the internal acceptance, the internal understanding of who you are and who has any rights over you. It is about what you believe about yourself and not waiting for approval from anybody else. And I think that's really important, because people give up when they don't get this seal of approval or the letter back or from the Attorney General or this or that, and they go, oh, I didn't do it because they didn't say yeah. Then, like he said, they're never going to say yeah, because if they say yes to me, they're going to say yes to the whole world.
You
and
know your
they won't
truth.
have that.
You know your conscience.
Thank you.
Right, and when you know that, you don't turn your face from that truth. It doesn't matter whether other people acknowledge it or approve it or not. It makes no difference. Christ didn't care whether someone else approved his belief. Muhammad didn't care if someone else approved their belief. They knew what the truth was. They knew who their one authority was, the Creator, and that was it. And they carry on, so you can't allow it. They will try and trigger your fear. If your fear is losing your house or losing your car or whatever, you're losing your job.
They will blatantly lie.
Yeah, because they have to, because they've created a fraudulent system. And if this capitulates, they'll all be hung for it. And when I say they'll be hung for it, I'm not using that as sensational words. Tony Blair tried to repeal the death sentence, and he failed to do so because he didn't have the authority to do it. In the Constitution, with a trial by jury, if the people decide high treason has been committed, they have the right, if they choose to do so, to hang them. Okay, that's part of it. There's no emotion, that's just how it is. Sometimes the ultimate fate has to be there as a deterrent. Throughout history, it's always been there.
If I could just put one or two caveats in here as well, though, is that I sometimes feel that there's a slightly incorrect characterization by the freedom movement, if you like, as to what's really going on in courts. I would characterize it slightly differently. And I would say that most of the people who are operating in courts don't actually know, and they don't actually understand any of this possible stuff to do with Admiralty and all of those other things. I don't think we need to point to that, and I don't think it's right that we do either, because I think it's largely a distraction. Because if it's an illegitimate system anyway, then what are you doing giving it energy? Exactly. What we should be, all the time that you're messing with their system and their mechanisms to come back at them and playing them at their own games, all the time that you're doing that, you're not calling them out in the official system of law. Yeah, so in a way that benefits them. Yeah, what you should be doing is raising the constitutional law as an issue, the fact that they are acting outside the law, and that's kind of it. They don't want you to point that out. Yeah, so having people going off and playing games in their courts, yeah, is possibly a distraction anyway, and I also think it kind of looks a bit clownish as well, the more you talk about that kind of stuff. You need to remain in the constitutional law. Keep pointing out the fact that they are acting unlawfully, criminally, actually. So, and that's all you need. Yeah. So yes, you can kind of know in the back of your mind that there's some funny games going on in their systems that they might have set up. I mean, parallel systems. Fine, but I don't concentrate on that at all, because I know that they're committing crimes. Yeah. So keep raising the fact that they're committing crimes rather than going in and trying to unravel what they're doing. More important, I would say. That's just my feeling.
honest for you there.
You've got no choice but to go into their court.
So just for the camera, there's a man behind the camera that says sometimes you have no choice but to go to court.
But that's not. You may choose whether or
He's
not you
fighting
go
for
to
his
court,
kids, though.
right? But you may choose, and they will try and do it. Yes, there might be situations where they've taken your children and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, there you've got huge emotional wrench coming in, in the way that they're doing it, and that's why they do it. Let's not make no mistakes. All right, what you're dealing with is the depth of depravity. And that's why everyone has taken all the time out that they have from their jobs and everything over the last 3 years if it was coronavirus, 6 years, 7 years if it was Brexit, or 9/11 or whenever it was you started to wake up to the deception. There you go, the little one agrees, that's good. The universe gave us a little sign there, right? So that's the important part of it, really. Yeah, go on.
Cool, good.
Yeah.
Any more questions, guys? Anyone want to be able to ask Will something?
Gentleman over here.
Brother, please.
Is there anybody here in the group who has any experience of setting up a common law court?
Yeah, we have set a few up. We did one in Canterbury and a few other places. And the thing is, at the moment, setting up the court is not difficult. The difficult bit is getting a juror selection. Okay, jurors don't need.
Well.
Jurors don't need. Sorry, mate, you're holding that up.
That's all right.
Jurors don't need to have a PhD or a law degree. Jurors just have to be over a certain age and experience enough of life and be sound of mind. In the olden days, if you have a think, go back to King Alfred's time and the rest of it, they didn't have school and the people couldn't read or write like they can today. And so that's why they were called court hearings, because things were done audibly. You're operating from your conscience because it is to do with living men and women's rights. It's not to do with whether Moderna and Pfizer are having an argument over the patent for a vaccine. It's about whether or not your choice to take that vaccine is there. It doesn't matter if Pfizer have created the perfect vaccine and it actually fixes all cures and you'll live forever. That might be the outcome of the court case. But that has no bearing on your decision whether or not to take it. That's still a personal sovereign decision. Right, and so that's the aspect. Does that answer your questions? When I talk about juror selection, what is it? The idea is that 12 jurors are essentially the creator manifest in the courtroom. Okay, there's 12 people operating from their conscience. And the problem we have at the moment is that people's arguments are stuck in duality. They're stuck in the anti-vax, pro-vax, leave or remain, Trump or anti-Trump, right, or whatever it is. They haven't come to the determination that what it's about is freedom of choice. Everyone, I don't know anyone that doesn't want freedom of choice. LGBTQ, BLM, everyone at the end of it, those people who, apart from those who are organising it, those people at the bottom all want freedom of choice. And the common law courts are there to protect your freedom of choice. So the jury have to have a cross-section of society in it. You have to have people that are pro the legislation and anti the legislation. Because it only takes one jury member to say that I think that infringes with my rights for it to be wiped out. Wow. It's not a majority mob rule thing. One person can decide that is infringing on my rights and that's enough for it to go out. Wow. Right? And that we would call it, and want of a better phrase, is what I refer to as the protected hermit dynamic. Okay, if one person chooses to live in the Highlands completely alone in their own way, as long as they're not causing loss, harm or injury to anybody else, it is our duty to protect their right to live that way. And it is their duty to protect our right to live that way. That is how democracy allows each person to live under the rules that they choose, as long as they're not causing loss, harm or injury to anybody else. Right, so the problem at the moment is that people need to start getting out of this political sides, left wing, right wing, and all this duality bullshit. And get to a point to find the truth is about free will and sovereignty. So to get to that point, people from both sides of the argument first have to respect the fact that actually you can both do as you want. Yes. And the system we're proposing is so you can both do what you want. If you want to take the vaccine, I don't have a problem with you taking the vaccine. If you don't want it, don't take it. I'm not bothered about whether or not you take it. What I'm bothered about is whether or not you have the choice to take it. And ideally, that'll be on honest information. But in this world we live in, you can't guarantee honest information all the time.
Yeah.
So it has to come through education, critical thinking. We have to take responsibility for our actions, not blame the government for what they're doing. The government, like a rabbi said, awesome video, I'll have to dig it out. He said, the government were always tyrannical. The establishments and the empires were always tyrannical. They're playing their part really well. What part are you playing? They're playing the part they were supposed to play.
I'm glad you said empires, because it's global.
It is global. It's a global thing, yep.
Just to be absolutely spot on. I mean, just to add to that this is actually an awful lot about us. You know, we've ended up in the condition of slavery, if you want to think of it like that, because you only have to touch the sides of it and you'll see that it is. Yeah. We've ended up in that position largely because of our lack of assertion and of our boundaries, and the lack of asserting our constitutional rights. So we're actually an awful lot to blame for this, and because it's gone so wildly off track, we've got a lot of work to do. And that means reaching a tipping point of big numbers. There's one thing I just wanted to just clarify about courts as well, because you're going to reach a problem at the enforcement stage. So this whole idea of setting up your independent courts, they are meant to be independent, and even the system's courts really are meant to be the people's courts. Yeah? So that, in a way, what we should be doing is forcing the system back into how it's supposed to be operating. This idea of setting up parallel courts is not going to work just doing it off back, kind of, just completely independently in parallel, because you're going to have a problem when you get to the point of enforcement. What are you going to do when you need to enforce that? Yeah? So I'm not a fan of that myself. What I'm really a fan of is shaming the system in large enough numbers into getting back into the condition that it should be in lawfully. Yeah, by showing them the law. And if enough people were doing it, it would be there. It would work. Yeah. So I just wanted to make that clear, that generally speaking, the people in the system do not understand how things are meant to operate. They're not taught properly constitutional law. Okay, and a lot of people say things like, oh, they're all, kind of doing things behind the scenes and they all know. No, they don't know, actually. That's a very cartoonish way of characterising it, which is very common in the freedom movement. And it's important that we educate, that we bring people on side in the legal profession and in the police. It's important that we do that. I just wanted to say that.
I mean, the other part of it that needs to be independent is the executive. The police should be an independent body. They shouldn't be controlled by the legislature. That, again, will bring corruption. Yeah. Right? The real reason they were constabulated.
How it's supposed to work.
Yeah, but they've all been created as corporations, like you have, each one of you, through various mechanisms, right, so that they can process you like a commodity and like chattel. But it's not supposed to be that way. The executive should be of sentient living men and women, just like the independent judiciary should be. Not of people that are paid by the very people who are the corruption and the tyrants. That's insanity. We suffer from huge mental health issues where we think the most important decisions in our lives can be made by the same people that make the rules.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
Modern day slavery,
People can go around. People think that going around telling people the truth will wake them up. This is one of the biggest myths of all time. Okay, the truth has been on cigarette packets for 40 years. No one stopped smoking cigarettes. Wow. If that isn't a social experiment to prove to you the truth doesn't determine bugger all when it comes to human behaviour, nothing will. Right, when the pain comes to hit you and the doctor tells you you've got lung cancer, you might stop smoking. Right, it's the same now. How have people woken up? People woke up when 9/11 took some of their rights away, or Brexit took some of their rights away, and now coronavirus has taken everyone's rights away. Yeah, and the Coronavirus Act and everything. So the notion that we can go around and this truth will come out and everyone will suddenly wake up is fantasy. Okay? People will wake up when their conscience is pricked. Either they're compassionate people, they see someone else suffering so their conscience rises, or they have to be bitten in the arse themselves and then their conscience rises and they act. We have, you'll be glad to know, contracted the ultimate strategic partner in pain administration. They're called the government, and they are doing a really good job of waking people up in waves because they will continue turning the pain dial up. They have to in order to carry out the agenda that they want to carry out. What really matters now is that as those waves are woken up by government, The people who understand have the solutions in place to educate those people as they feel the pain. The best sales are warm sales, not cold sales. And as people feel the pain, they are ready and receptive to listen to the possible solutions.
Yeah.
So energy bills going up, people can't afford them, might lose their houses, causing them pain, looking for ways to come out of their bills or challenge the government, then you can have a discussion with them. But if they're sat happy in their house with their 3 meals a day watching EastEnders and the rest of it, they feel comfortable. They're not going to move at that point. So they have to feel the pain. So either go around causing people pain that you can blame the government for, or relax, look at the solutions and allow them to cause the pain, and you be ready to catch the people as they wake up. For me, that's the efficient and effective way of doing it.
Just a couple more things that occurred to me. So just backing up on Suk's point there about calling things out. This is about the pain levels, because if you understand the more esoteric subjects, such as natural law and the occult body of knowledge, all of that information is all about understanding at the universal level what it is about being in this realm. And it's really ultimately about lessons, and it's about contrast. It's about, because this is kind of kindergarten level stuff here on this planet. It's about being able to spot the contrast, spot what's good and what isn't, what's acceptable and what isn't. Okay, yes, there's a higher perspective beyond that, but at this level, it's about calling out immorality and wrongdoing. And most of the country can't do that, because if they did, all of this would be over tomorrow. Yeah? So in the collective, we are acting immorally. And one of the principles of natural law is that your freedom is directly proportional to the level of morality in your community. Wow. So what does that tell you about the state of morality? You see, actually, it's about self-reflection and shadow work, ultimately. That's really what it is. And without that, and without starting that process, which is known, by the way, as the hero's journey, if any of you have studied Carl Jung and just natural law more generally, actually, you'll understand that shadow work process is really ultimately known as the hero's journey, because it's the most heroic thing that you can do. Why? Because it's looking at your own stuff. It's looking at your own darkness. It's your own prejudices, your own demons. And by the way, that's what you do when you're on a jury.
Wow, yeah.
Okay? So the whole idea with the Constitution is that it has in place a mechanism that is alchemical in nature. It actually transposes what's the word I'm looking for? Transmutes, that's nice, we like that one. Transmutes your consciousness into a higher consciousness. Or at least it starts you on that process. Because it's ultimately about shadow work. Yes, you're being forced to reflect on somebody else, not yourself. But that helps. Because if you're not directing that judgment at yourself, you're more likely to be able to handle it and deal with it. Which is why the jury is clever. You see, it's smart. Yeah, it's there for healing as well. Do you know how many cases, percentage-wise, actually reach a jury in this country at the moment? 1%. Wow. That's why we're in the state we're in. Because we're not doing jury stuff.
No, and that's a bastardised jury as well.
And that's a bastardised jury. It's not even the real thing.
Telling them what evidence they can and can't listen to, and which witnesses they will and won't listen to. Yeah. So they're colouring the case. Wow. Actually, in King Alfred's time, when they did that, he hung them for it. Yeah. He didn't give them a directorship in a different department or send them on a world tour of talks to all his fellow monarchs for £1 million a talk. Yeah. He hung them. Much more efficient. Saves a lot of taxpayer money.
And keep in mind, actually, at the time of Magna Carta, all courts were courts of conscience. Now, that's an important phrase. Use it. Okay, use it with the establishment. Why aren't the courts courts of conscience anymore? Because they know they should be. Yeah? There you go.
I think that's the moment, man. Thank you so much.
Can I just say I do subscribe to everything you've said, and I do believe that there is an element of free will. However, I would add, we do have a duty to take along and protect our children, the vulnerable and the elderly. So it can't be a selfish journey, in my opinion.
Quite right.
Some people subscribe that is how it should be. I don't. We have a duty to the future for our children, to protect the infirm and make sure that we bring everybody with us. And it's not an individual thing, it's a collective.
That's right.
Superb. Yeah.
That's right. My daughter's
So guys, I'm going to shout Magna. I need you to say Carter. I need that same level when we started, okay? We're going to keep the energy high, all right? Magna! Carta! Magna! Carta! Magna! Carta! I love you all, man. Thank you so much. Thank you, King. What a warrior.
Well done. Good man.